there was a comment about related to the airport with the noise and all of it. And it was stated also that, about our airport land use plan, and, the fact that it is possibly out of date. And so I just kind of want to clarify and find out what the status is on that and how that would help us with our mitigation of some of the issues that's been raised.
Right. My understanding is that the county is at the top of the list for state funding in terms of receiving grant funding to update the airport's land use plan. However, it can be, I guess, anticipated that after the money is received, which may take 2 to 3 years in and of itself, the airport plan would still need to go out for an RFP, and then a consultant would have to be hired and the plan prepared. So there's still several years before that update could be anticipated.
So if there are some areas that we need to have amended or whatever, I would think that we could possibly do that without having to go through our entire update. Is that correct?
I think would probably be incorporated in the update.
Okay.
I want to be clear on the question though. Supervisor, are you asking whether or not we can make changes to the project approvals if in fact there were changes that to land use, for example, that a revision to the comprehensive land use plan were to identify? I think the answer to that is we probably in fact would not be making changes. We had a similar conversation with respect to the changes to the local coastal program and the fact that we typically would grandfather in approved development to the rules that existed at the time of the approval. So to be very clear about your question, I think the answer is we probably could not incorporate changes if we made significant changes down the road.
So the rules get frozen in time.
It's frozen in time. Okay.
How much money, how much grant dollars does the airport receive?
I'm sure there's someone here who can correct me as supervisor if I get it wrong, but my understanding is that we have since 2007 received nearly $9 million in FAA Airport Improvement Program grant funds, and we've identified another $26 million or so in grant funds for projects through 2014. I want to be very clear though that that's for 2 airports. That's for San Carlos Airport and Half Moon Bay Airport. We honestly, sitting here today, I don't have a good breakdown as between the 2 airports that I can share with you. Maybe there might be somebody else who could speak to that.
And what are some of the grants for? What kind of improvements?
Well, Supervisor, I know generally they're for capital improvements, but I'm going to defer to the airport manager who can speak more specifically to that.
President Group, members of the board, Mark Larson, Airports Director. We've got a number of projects at both airports. At Half Moon Bay Airport in particular, we have a parallel taxiway project that is currently under design. It is approximately a $3.5 million project. There are a number of other safety, security, and pavement rehabilitation and infrastructure improvements at both airports. The breakout, I think, John, on the past grants over the last 4 or 5 years is approximately $3.5 million for Half Moon Bay and probably close to 5.4 for San Carlos Airport.
There would be, should the FAA withhold grant money, they would not withhold it for San Carlos. It's not a twofer.
Well, Supervisor, that's a really good question, and what I would respond is it would depend on whether or not we were talking about multiple agreements or one agreement county-wide. And sitting here right now, I'm not 100% sure whether or not these are 2 different airports. So I'm operating this fairly confidently on the assumption that you would have 2 different agreements, and we would have the Half Moon Bay Airport in particular that would be implicated.
And the letter that we received from the FAA, 2 or 3 people have now said it is the firmest, strongest letter of its type they have seen. So do we have something better than kind of a good feeling assumption that they will not hold themselves to this?
Supervisor, other than again the search that I did sort of less formally than actually calling the director of the FAA. I don't think we have 100% assurance that they wouldn't perhaps take some action on this. What I could tell the Board of Supervisors is that it's a fairly exhaustive administrative process that's involved in cutting off grant funding, to include a review by the director of the FAA, followed by a proceeding before a hearing officer appointed by the director of the FAA, and finally federal litigation. So it's the process itself suggests that it's not something that's taken lightly, but I can't sit here and say that there's zero chance that this could happen. And having talked to or heard Mr. Larson's description of the amounts involved, it would be a large downside if it went that direction.
Well, we certainly don't have those kind of funds, as we're about to approach a very difficult budget season.
To clarify one thing if I can too, I think
Please.
Camille may have a little bit of outdated information on the update of the Half Moon Bay Airport land use plan. We do expect to get funding for that within the next couple of weeks. And we do have a contractor that we're ready to issue a task order to get that started.
Well, that's good news. On the housing, and I apologize, I cannot find the page in my staff report, but my recollection is that we're not going to build 50 units of housing in 3 or 4 years. But in the first 3 or 5 years, there will be 8 units built.
Yes, actually, I have a slide on that.
Couldn't find it.
Thank you. I think it's actually not too far away. Here it is. So this slide illustrates that there's 4 phases for wellness center construction. The first phase goes to the end of the first year. No residential units will be constructed under that phase. 8 residential units will be constructed under phase 2, which is by the end of year 3. And then a minimum of 37 residential units by the end of year 5, and the complete construction of all 57 residential units by the end of year 10.
Now, is that because of funding, or is that because of the funding?
Yes.
Okay. Is there some way that we can escalate the development of the housing? I mean, I think I fully understand the need for a longer development period in commercial, but we have listened now, and the Planning Commission also, how important this housing is, how needed this housing is, and is there a way that we can get more units more quickly?
Supervisor, to that I would say that this phasing is reflected in the development agreement, which lies, of course, entirely within the discretion of the board. The board, of course, can approve the project without a development agreement, and certainly the phasing is laid out as entirely within the discretion of the board. And if the instructions were to figure something out that better reflected a different timeline, then we could certainly.
And so, as I understand it, we send the development agreement back to the Planning Commission with some sets of instructions, or with some requests, or with some asking them to look at different things?
Yes, Supervisor. We have made some significant modifications to the development agreement since the time that the Planning Commission recommended it to you all. And under the government code and our own ordinances, we have to send it back for a report and a recommendation in any event. So anything that was discussed here would be part of what would go back to the Planning Commission for a report.
Okay. Yes, we received a letter from March 14th from the California Coastal Commission suggesting that there were a number of issues in this project that were not in agreement with our local coastal plan, and not in agreement with certain aspects of the coastal of our existing local coastal plan, as well as the amendments that we are currently working on. Can you make some comments on that? Just generally speaking, what if we should approve this project, what ramifications we would face from the California Coastal Commission and our own local coastal plan that we are close to finishing?
Yes, Supervisor.